Hey everybody, it's Ted Prodromou, and this is Epic Encore. And Epic Encore is my new community. It's for people that are in that stage of life from their corporate life to retirement. So that gap in between, whatever that is, some people it's a day, some people it's years. So it's kind of that area you really want to stay productive and stay engaged. And retirement's not for you yet. And a lot of people love to retire and drink beer and go to the beach, but this community is really for people that want to really stay engaged and active. So one thing I did last year, I took Facebook ads class and I met our guest today, Nic Lucas. And he has it's so hard to explain. Maybe I'll just
I'm going to
let
make
you.
you do it though. I'm going to see if you can do it.
Yeah, I was joking around with Perplexity, the new AI, and I said, write an introduction about Nic Lucas. And it wrote pages and pages and pages. And it said, where do your followers hang out online? And it went more pages and pages. So it gave me way too much information. So let's just pass it over to you, and you can really share better than I can of what you do because you go so deep into neurosciences, and it's fascinating how you apply it to marketing and sales. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I guess the best way to say it is where I am at in my life right now. I'm very much I see everything through the lens of the brain, and especially neuroplasticity, which is our brain's ability to change. So our brain very much influences the thoughts and behaviors um, that we experience. And it's often more automatic and habitual than a lot of us would like to admit because we like to feel like we're in control. But a lot of our behaviors and thoughts are habitual, they're automatic. At the same time, the way we then think and uh, behave can in turn change our brain. And so it's this kind of beautiful feedback loop. And so once you begin to see that and the curtain gets pulled back, you realize that this applies to every area of life. I mean, the brain is your greatest tool and it can be applied to your personal relationships. It can be applied to problem solving. It can be applied to your career and it can be applied to business, obviously. And so, um, that's essentially where I've arrived at in my life and how I got there and the kind of, I guess, the scope of what it is that I do in a very short background is my father was a minister, and so from a very early age, every night at the dinner table, we're talking about deep and meaningful things about life, about values, about ethics, about why people do the things they do, and how to live a virtuous life, which is really philosophy in a way, right? And I was my first PhD. I always joke with people was as a public high school dropout. So there's the PhD. Um, because I didn't know what to do and I couldn't see the sense in studying and I wasn't good at it either. So if you're not good at something and you can't see the reason to continue with it, you drop out and you do something else. And I was a musician at the time, so that's what I dropped out to do. Subsequently, I did go back as an adult. I went back to night school and I finished my higher school certificate and I got myself into university and now it's 5 degrees later, right? So and then I actually ended up getting the real PhD which was in diagnostic medicine, and I won't go into all the bits and pieces about it. But during that period of time, I lectured neuroscience for 10 years. I started a number of businesses, and of course, my mind immediately turned to, excuse me, is how, given this is the tool that I'm using to do business, and given it's the tool I'm using to do family and do my being a husband and being a father and all those things, how do I improve this tool? And so um, that's where I came from. That's how I ended up doing what I do now because I'm a scientist at heart. And I want to use the best available evidence for what's actually going on. And there's a lot of theories about it and lots of people talking about it, but ultimately I want to focus in on the things that I can use that are reliable, repeatable, foundational, that apply in multiple situations, and that I can have the confidence in. And so that's where we are today.
The whole brain thing really interests me because a couple of years ago I got COVID. It's a real mild case, just a cold. I never got a fever or aches really, but I had severe brain fog and memory loss for 2 years afterwards. And I've been really diving into supplements. I'm doing brain training exercises, and I'm improving. I still have a little bit of brain fog, but it's been over 2 years. So the brain can change and adapt. Because for a while there, I'd meet with people on Zoom calls, and then we'd meet 2 weeks later because they hired me, and I had no idea who the person was. I had no recollection of ever talking to them. So the
No,
brain can
and
adapt.
and we can say those things off the cuff in a comment like this, but for people for us, because we use our brains for everything, like whether you're doing a physical business or job, or whether you're doing a thinking type one, either way, you're using your brain to do it. And so when we begin to lose that, or we see deficits in that, it can really be a strike to our identity and our sense of what's possible for the future, because we're going, hang on, um, like it's if you end up with some kind of you notice some kind of decline going on up here, it's a worry, and it can really shake you to your core.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So continue. I want to learn more.
Well, look, the background's there. What I the term I heard, and it's applied to nations, but I wanted to apply it to individuals, and the term is mental wealth. And that's because we talk about mental health, and that's fine. Need a drink of water here. But mental wealth is a far more exciting prospect for me, because it's not just about the financial numbers in the bank. It's about the wealth that we have in our life, and also the brain's ability to create the wealth that we desire. So that's why I like it, and it's far deeper and it's far richer than kind of overblown concepts that have almost become a bit meaningless in a way. Like mindset gets thrown around so much, and we don't really know what that means. And so I wanted to shift away from that and really focus in on mental wealth, because it's so much more than mindset. And so that's what I wanted to kind of lead folks through today. And I'll share my screen here because I do have a few slides prepared, and I want to do that. We're going to go there. And now I guess I'm asking, do you see my screen there, Ted?
Yep. Perfect.
All right. And so now I want to. Oh, yeah, okay, that's all right. So, hashtag do better, because that's all what we want to do. And I'm calling this personal mental wealth for career professionals. And so if we jump through here, as a kind of definition, which is so we're all on the same page about what I'm talking about, is the integration. Mental wealth is the integration of cognitive, it's our thinking, emotional, that's how our body feels, and social well-being, that's our relationships, with business success. Or you could throw in their career success. I know a lot of the people I speak to in the Generation X age group and above are, a bit sick and tired of working for other people, and are looking to do things for themselves, and perhaps have the financial capacity to draw down on a mortgage or whatever it is to actually start something. And they wonder, well, what am I going to do? So your success absolutely depends on mental wealth. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. As I've got it here, the quality of your life, mental wealth, is a direct correlation to the quality of your thinking. And the quality of thinking, we're going to go through it we're going to pick it apart today. And hopefully people will learn to see themselves in a very different way as a result of this very practical exercise I'm going to lead everyone through. The quality of your thinking has a direct correlation to the function of your brain. So if your brain is not functioning well, your thinking will not function as well. And that's as basic as not sleeping well enough, all the way through to having had COVID or some other viral infection that has left inflammation and scar tissue in your brain that literally is affecting your ability to think. And you've got brain fog, all of which, by the way, is changeable, because the brain is so resourceful at being able to adapt and change, even to physical injury that it has had. Okay, so that's what's really exciting about this whole area.
That
So
just
the
happened to
key,
me, actually. Not sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
when
go.
I was going through the brain fog, I was writing emails every day, and I loved writing articles. And I had ideas just flowing every morning. I'd wake up and like, oh, what am I going to write about today? And in the middle of this, I had like a blank screen, and I could not think of anything to start writing about. It was like really scary.
Yeah, well, I can imagine that, and that just doesn't happen in that scenario, but in scenarios where you're talking with people, or you're trying to close a deal, or you're negotiating something, um, and your reputation's at stake and you don't want to lose status, all those things
Yeah.
can affect. Yeah. So the key things here that we're talking about, and you'll see why I think mindset is an inadequate term, as much as I understand it and it's got its uses. The real thing we're talking about is not mindset at all. It's executive function. These are the very specific functions that your brain carries out that enables you to succeed in life. And we're just going to go through a list of the key ones. So if we jump back in here, it's in the left prefrontal cortex on this side of the brain. These are the general things. We have our working memory. It's your ability to hold numbers in your head. Well, when you get a two-factor authentication code these days and you have to remember and hold it in your head, if you forget that stuff, you can't function properly, right? It's essential. Verbal fluency, being able to speak and articulate your ideas and hold cohesive sentences, or just have clarity around what it is you're trying to say. Logical reasoning is essential, and we all know that logical reasoning is something we need to learn. Not all of us, and most of us, aren't naturally logical. There's all kinds of logical fallacies and false reasoning that we have, and to see through that and understand it's an essential part of executive function. Goal-oriented planning. This is knowing what to do that's going to get you as quick as you can from A to B. Task switching is another important function where you're able to switch from one task to the other, as opposed to getting locked in on something. And the example I might give there, especially with people who've had brain fog, is maybe, or even just some kind of change, is you find you sit down to do some work and you start on a task that should be a 5 to 10 minute task, and 2 hours later you're still on it and you wonder, what happened to my morning? That's because you lost the ability to have goal-oriented planning and task switch, and you just get lost in time, and before you know it, time. So these are very practical everyday experiences. These are just the academic terms that describe our everyday experiences. Being able to problem solve. Inhibitory control is the ability to, you're focusing on something and an alert shows up on your phone. Inhibitory control is your brain's ability to inhibit all the stimuli in the brain that is telling you to look at that alert. And if you lose inhibitory control, then you're just looking at everything all the time. And that's a key function that can get lost. If we go to the right prefrontal cortex on this side of the brain, we're looking at your executive attention. So your ability to pay attention on what you are doing. Creativity and divergent thinking. Well, we all know we need this. This is the basis of innovation. And if we lose this, we can't come up with a creative idea to help to close a deal, to help someone decide to buy from us. We can't find our way out of a stuck situation. This is essential. This is crucial. Emotional regulation is part of executive function. Our brains are designed to be hijacked by our emotions. And if they do, it can really set us off course. And so our ability to control that and regulate those emotions are essential. Risk assessment, making smart decisions and wise decisions. That's part of it. Decision making. Self-monitoring and metacognition. This is who are we? What's going on? That whole sense of self is all part of there. And then social cognition, which is really reading the room, reading other people, picking up the cues from people. So when you look at all of that, you realize why mindset is such an inadequate term if you're really wanting to be good at using your brain, because all of these are the important functions that we need to, and we can selectively lose some of these depending on what's going on for us. And so this is really, we're not going to go into the detail of how to get better at all of these today, but I am going to give you a very good overview of how we can improve our executive function. So just as a slight digression, I want to just talk about the brain for a second. When it comes to health. And we've got people listening who knows the age groups, but 30 to 40 maybe, or 40 to 44, 45 to 49, 50 to 60, 60 to 70, and 70 and above. Obviously your age. And we used to think of mental decline as being something that elderly people had. So here is a very large study published in 2023 looking at mental decline, and showing that it begins to start as early. It's very slow here, but you can see as early as 50, you're beginning to get a mental decline. It then takes a sharp decrease even further at around the age of 70. But it's not just starting here. There's this gradual, soft, mild mental decline that begins to happen. And a large study coming out of the UK showing early signs of this even at age 45. And this is represented by the things like forgetting where you've put your keys, or forgetting that word, or not being able to think as quickly. It's brain processing speed that might begin to slow down. At the same time, this is just looking at some mental decline. At the same time, in this age group, we also benefit from a whole lot of really learned patterns. It's called crystallized intelligence, where we also begin to see our way through problems we've seen a lot of times before because we recognize the patterns. And that's why people also in this age group have wisdom, right? So it's not like we're all just mentally declining. We also have a lot of wisdom from that age group and above, but we still all experience this kind of mental decline, but we don't have to. There are ways to mitigate this and to really maintain sharp mental focus. And we're going to go over some of that today.
Cool.
And that, just if you're interested, that comes from, there's a study of cognitive decline. It's called the Whitehall study. It's a prospective cohort study in the BMJ, and that was the one. This is one published earlier in 2012, showing the kind of earlier onset of mental decline than we all thought. Another one here: association between sleep quantity and quality in early adulthood with cognitive function. People who've had a lot of disturbed sleep in their younger years, or have gone out a lot and just gone, I can do this, I can party on. It's the classic entrepreneur thing too, of hustle, grind, get up, don't worry, game all night, get up, have a bit of a sleep. All of this is associated with a decrease in cognitive function in midlife, not elderly life. But this can be addressed and attended to. So how to improve executive function? And to improve effectuation. In fact, that slide slipped in here. It's not meant to be there. We're not talking about effectuation today. It's a very good series of principles about entrepreneurship. But ultimately, though, we want to improve our mental wealth. So this is just going back to what I had before, this concept of we have a brain. It's a biological thing. But somehow the mind emerges from that brain in ways we don't know. And there's various theories around consciousness. But the brain and the mind, we do know, are completely interlinked. The brain affects what our mind does, but our mind in turn, through epigenetics, turns on different genes in our brain and can then change our brain. And so we're not set in stone. We are absolutely not set in stone, and we can change our brain. And that's something that we work with. That's the basis of all of this. So I wanted to get into some of the struggles that we get, because we're going to get into the core kind of concept of what we're talking about here. The things that people struggle with, or have struggled in their life, or pain or worry or concern in their life, very, very common one is money. Money around future, money around legacy, concerns about scarcity, all that kind of thing. Not enough. Another thing that people have is guilt. And this can affect them. I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs, and they have guilt in their life, whether they feel guilty about things they've done in their past, or relationships that have turned out wrong, or guilt around what they haven't achieved in life by a certain stage. All those kinds of things, guilt can affect the brain. Hang-ups about anything can all be affecting the brain and causing struggle. The concept of retirement can cause a lot of struggle, right? I speak to a lot of guys and women who have that issue. Conflict avoidance. People who've been avoiding conflict, and they do, but they end up, and it causes a lot of internal struggle for them. Some people who have an attitude of, basically, this is it, fuck off. That whole boisterous, no, they can all fuck off kind of thing. It's an antagonistic, angry response to a world that they feel is against them, and they're standing up to it. But this causes struggle in the brain. Identity issues. I was an engineer my whole life, and now I've got a tremor and I can't do the engineering anymore. What does this mean for me? Or any change in career. What does it mean if I'm no longer this thing? I've been a vocational person, like I've got a qualification like a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant, or I'm an IT professional, cybersecurity. I'm a marketing manager, but now I'm not. Like, all of these things create a lot of struggle for us. And leadership struggles too. Am I a leader? I find myself in a role, but I don't see myself as a leader, and this causes struggle. These are just a few of the many different types of things that cause struggle. I mean, back over to you, because you speak to a lot of folks then in this Epic Encore. What are the kinds of struggles that you speak with people about?
Well, everybody's worried about money. Very few people say I have enough, even though they probably have enough. Retirement is a huge thing because you lose your purpose. For 40 years, you work and you have a job title and you're important at work, then you retire and you lose your purpose and your leadership and your identity, all that. So a lot of these really come together with that.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay, that means we're on the right page. So
Loneliness
this
is
is
another isolation, fear of isolation and being
right, yeah.
lonely is another big factor.
Yeah, that's a big one that wasn't on that list. It is, and being lonely can really impact the brain. There's a lot of studies on that,
Yeah.
and there's a difference between being lonely and being alone, because some people feel rejuvenated being alone and they're not lonely. But when people feel lonely, it can cause their brain to really miss. And if loneliness has been shown to really impact executive function,
Yeah.
right? So that's key. So that's why it's so important for really successful aging. And what we're talking about now is the concept of health span, not just how long you live, but how well you live. And what predicts health span is being really engaged and active in community, in groups of other people, and not being isolated. It's essential that people do that, and in whichever way they can. And that's been through your program here as well, right? So let's look at pain and struggle, and let's now pick this apart in a very practical way. All right, very practical way. Pain and struggle refers to all of the above that we just talked about. And what I've noticed is that there are thinking frameworks or mental frameworks that people use and aren't even aware they are using that lead them to have pain and struggle. These same frameworks may also have led them to have success in their life, but at the same time also creates pain and struggle. And you'll see exactly why this happens as I unpack this. So the first thinking framework I want to talk about is what we can call the right-wrong dichotomy. And that is because from the moment that we are introduced to the world, especially in a Greco-Roman Western culture, is we are introduced to the idea of categorizing things as right or wrong. You know, that's the correct spelling of the word. That's the incorrect spelling of the word. You got the answer right in maths. You didn't get the answer right in maths.
Mhm.
You were quiet during class when you should have been. You weren't quiet in class when you should have been. And as children, as we grow up, we begin to merge two unrelated concepts. We begin to merge right and wrong in terms of factually right or wrong, like maths. You know, 2 plus 2 is 4. It will always be 4. It will never not be 4. But if you say 5, you got it factually wrong. Talking back at the teacher or misbehaving is more a behavioral issue, and we also get in trouble for that. And what we do is we merge the two together. So when we are wrong, we also feel bad, right? And when we are right, we also feel good. And at a very basic biologic level, to do with dopamine and reward centers in our brain, we crave being right, and we absolutely resist being wrong. We don't want to be wrong. And very often, for us to be right, we have to make someone else wrong.
Yeah.
And I think I just summed up the entire political situation,
Yes, you did.
right? And so, because I don't want anything about me to be wrong, I'm addicted to being right. And I have to make the more wrong I make you, the more right I become.
Yeah.
Now, this obviously has very useful application when it's factual, when it's got to do things like maths, science. I mean, you're either going to launch that rocket successfully and land it again, or you're not, based on maths and engineering and all those kinds of things. But it's not the only framework that we can use. I'm not saying not to use the right-wrong dichotomy, but I'm just going to introduce the fact there's another thinking framework. Again, where this came from was Plato, way back in the Greek philosophers, wanted to categorize everything. And so he did it for biology. And that's where we get all the different species. And they're either in that species or they're not. It's a bird or it's a dog. It can't be one, it's one or the other. You've got to put these things in the right categories. But he also categorized things that are very much more qualitative, things like humor, rhetoric, politics, ideas. And so, but that's where this whole thing came from, this obsession with putting things in the right bucket
Mhm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, if we do this, and I'll get to the other thinking framework in a second, if we use this right-wrong dichotomy, it produces linear thinking. And the linear thinking comes from the deductive logic that this is based on. But what it can do when you combine this linear thinking, i.e., my brain is thinking this thing, it is logical and makes sense to me, and you think something different, then you're wrong.
Right.
And not only are you wrong, but there's something not just wrong about you, you're a bit inferior to me. Or the other version could be, I've got this logic in my brain. Clearly, it must be the true answer because I've come up with it. That makes me feel a bit better, a bit more superior. It's not like we consciously do it, but this is what begins to happen. And you know this happens. If you've had a manager who has to be right,
Yeah.
doesn't want to be embarrassed in front of the staff, or an employer or another co-worker or spouse, you know what I mean? This is just everyday life for everyone. I haven't come across anyone who hasn't had this, but I need you to understand that the linear thinking it produces can produce results, but it's linear thinking and it often leads to this kind of blame and judgment game.
I remember
If we do
recently
that,
something came up and something my mother told me when I was 5 years old, probably. I believed that was what it was. And it was like totally wrong.
yeah,
It's like, oh, well, my mother told me, so it must have been
yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah. What that does is it closes the loop. And if you've got pain and struggle, and then you continue to use the right-wrong dichotomy as your only thinking framework, it leads to linear thinking with more blame and judgment, which just creates more pain and struggle. And this is just one of the cycles that people are in. One of the cycles that people are in. Um, but there's more. The other thing is the responsibility issue. And a good way to describe this, to detach it from the concept of blame, is to reverse the words to go able to respond. Um, and the thing is that we are 100% responsible or able to respond to anything that happens to us, unless we are completely incapacitated in some way. Okay, but even then, we might be able to respond mentally, even though we might not be able to respond physically. And when you walk through this concept, which is what I do with clients and help them understand this, is just how responsible we are for our lives. It's not that other people can't help us and can't come and join us, but if they do that, that's because they are responding to a situation. They're not responding for us because they can't respond for us because they're not us and they're not inside us. They're not inside our mind and they're not inside our body. So we are 100% responsible. Now, if we don't accept this, or if we only accept it for 95% of the time, so that's a no, we're not accepting 100% responsibility. That leads to a concept in psychology called an external locus of control, where there is something other than us that is responsible for us. And that's called an external locus of control. And people with a high external locus of control, that means they attribute a lot of the things that are happening to them as beyond their control, their inability to respond to it, their inability to change it, leads to a phenomenon in psychology, which is quite devastating for people, called learned helplessness. There's multiple studies on this. And so we feel unable to do anything, control anything, change anything at all. We feel like we don't have responsibility at all. And therefore, these people find it incredibly hard to change anything about their lives.
Hmm.
And if you have an external locus of control, even if you don't go to the extent of learned helplessness, but if you have some element where you are externalizing the ability to respond to something else or some other control factor, that leads back to more pain and struggle.
Hmm.
It's not to say there aren't other factors that are impacting you. It's saying that no matter what other factors impact me, I am able to respond to those things, no matter what they are.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but if you can't do that, it leads you back to more pain and struggle. And I have spoken to many, many clients, and not one of them haven't had both of these active.
Hmm. Yeah.
And even the ones who are quite self-aware and are quite used to taking responsibility for things, often then when I discover, okay, but what area of struggle do you have? We find that that's where they're not accepting 100% responsibility.
Hmm.
Okay, for people listening in, a bit of self-reflection would be to go, okay, is this going on for me? Um, okay. Another one is this. Another mental framework is the concept of accepting what is.
Right.
Not condoning it. We're not talking about condoning what is, endorsing what is, or anything like that. It's about accepting what is. There's a mountain in front of me I have to climb. No amount of wishing the mountain wasn't there will make that mountain go away.
Right.
It's accepting that the mountain is there, accepting what is. Um, and we're not talking about the future either. We're talking about either what has happened or what is in this present moment happening. It's unchangeable. It's accepting what is. This concept, of course, is people will be familiar with this. It's in all the religions. It's in a lot of psychological practices. There's a type of psychological practice called radical acceptance theory, and it's all about learning to accept what is. Here's what happens if you do not accept what is. If you're a no to that, you just get more pain and struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And again, every client I've had is not 100% accepting what is, because it can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
Right. Even the ones who are self-aware and of this practice and cultivate it still find parts of their life where they're not accepting what is. What does that do? Creates more pain and struggle. So now we've got 3 cycles all layered on top of one another, all that are leading back to pain and struggle of all of the above that we spoke about earlier on.
I
And
think
then there's
that's what it
a
is. I think of my wife because she's always late, and we've been together for 40 years. Now I accept she's never going to change. We're always going to be late. Where for a long time, it's like, come on, let's get there on time. And it just, now I accept it.
look to that point, because you've brought up an everyday mundane experience that we all have, but your point is so crucial, because those everyday things that we live, whether it's with a spouse, a co-worker, a business partner, or whatever it is, people we don't even know who are still having an impact on our life. Like, we've just had interest rates come down in Australia for the first time, but we've had interest rates go up. It's this body that sets interest rates that everyday person doesn't have control over, right? So accepting what is. The thing is, about back to your wife's case, because you brought it up, is it's her prerogative to do exactly what she wants to do, because she's 100% responsible for herself, and you're 100% responsible for yourself. So if you need to be somewhere on time, and then you're not there on time because someone else, it could be a partner, could be whoever it is, someone else is late. Ultimately, though, it's still your responsibility to be there on time and deal with that situation. And so if after a number of times you learn that when you go with this particular person, you end up being late, then it's still up to you to make sure that you're there on time.
Yeah.
However you go and sort that out. And you can do that by then doing linear thinking back over here. If the thinking framework is, oh, this person's wrong, I need to make them wrong because they've made me late. And by me being late, now I'm wrong, and I don't want to be wrong because I want to be right. So now I need to make them wrong and make it their fault that I'm late. That then creates more pain and struggle and arguments, because you're not accepting what is.
Yep.
And also not taking 100% responsibility. It's not their responsibility for you there to be there on time.
Mm-hmm.
It's your responsibility for you to be there on time. So you can see how those 3 mental frameworks all link in together. And if we could all realize this earlier in life, it would make life have a lot less pain and struggle in it, in that situation. Because you're right, you come to some point and you go, I accept that this is how this person is. They're not going to change. They don't have to change for me. I am able to respond, though,
Yep.
to make sure I get to my meeting on time. And that's what I'm going to do it. So it's a great example. It's a mundane example, but these mundane things, I've seen them make businesses fall apart.
Yeah.
Right?
It
Because they
spirals out
affect
of
it.
control. It just
Yeah,
compounds as you go.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
People lose jobs. People don't get promotions. People get fired because of these things here. And then they wonder what happened.
Right.
Okay. Because especially if someone's been let go and they want to, it might be, they may be completely, they did nothing wrong, but they want to make people feel wrong. and that they're right and they've been hard done by, but they might not be aware that there are certain things about them and the way they behave that have created non-conscious ripples effects, etc., that have made the whole thing awkward. So it's all about going, I fully accept that there's all these other things that have had an impact on me that I can have no control over.
Right.
But what I can have control over is me and how I respond. I'm 100% responsible for this. What was my role in this? As opposed to not even doing that self-reflection at all. And then you don't learn. But if you don't have a map to learn from, it's pretty hard to unravel this. I get to have clarity about this because of how many people I've spoken to and the fact I've identified every single one of these things in myself as well.
Cool.
The fourth one we'll talk about is, again, not controversial at all. It's mindfulness and all that sort of stuff is all the rage. All the big corporates have all their mindfulness, HR have their wellness things or whatever introduced. Present moment awareness is not some new concept. However, a lot of people aren't aware of the present moment awareness, or if they do, it's like pay lip sync. Or what does that mean? You do, you close your eyes and you're just aware of the moment. It's more about, to show the importance of it, it's more about what happens when you're not in present moment awareness. If you're not in present moment awareness, you're very often ruminating or you're fantasizing. So let's talk about these. Rumination is that self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the default mode network in the brain. And the default mode network is not executive function. So if you want to do better in your business, career, life, relationships, and you need to augment and enhance and optimize executive function, then spending time ruminating is in the default mode network and it's not activating executive function. And there's also research that shows that the more people ruminate, the more depressed they are.
Mm-hmm.
Rumination is thinking about what's going on now or the past and ruminating over those things over and over again. That wasn't fair. I didn't like that. They shouldn't have done that. If you say in your mind, they shouldn't have done it, you're not accepting what is.
Right.
If you say in your mind, they shouldn't have done it and they wronged me, you're using the right-wrong dichotomy. If you're saying they shouldn't have done it and they wronged me and it's their fault, you're not accepting 100% responsibility for what you can do in that situation or what you might have contributed to the situation. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so rumination is something that people can find themselves in. I was speaking to a clinical psychologist yesterday, and so much of the work she does with senior executives. So she does a lot of work in the banking sector, and she's a clinical psychologist and a executive coach combined together. So much of the problem that the senior banking executives she deals with have rumination.
Mm-hmm.
Going on, second guessing themselves, thinking about things and going back over things that have long gone. Okay, so that's rumination. Fantasy, on the other end, is thinking about the future. And it's okay to imagine the future, but if all you're doing is thinking about the future, again, that's default mode network in the brain. It's not executive function. Because the fantasy isn't anchored into the present moment, right? Mm-hmm. Here is what happens when you are thinking about the future and at the same time you think about the present moment obstacles that are in your way or the things that just need to get done. Like you may have a series of tasks. Like someone listening to this may be thinking, well, I did have an idea for starting a business and I see an end result, but I don't even know what my first step is.
Right.
But I keep thinking about that end result and how good it would be if I had a business. And surely I can, gosh, these days, 6 figures, what's that? There's all these young guys out there pulling 7 figures easily. Like, okay, I should do that. I can see that, but I don't know my first step. All I'm doing is fantasizing. If the first step is you need to be able to justify exactly what your offer is to someone else and have them give you feedback, have you actually written out what your offer is? And they go, no. Then the present moment awareness is, I don't even know how to articulate the offer or the service or the product. If you do that, here's the amazing thing about the brain. If you identify, here's what I want, fantasy, but here is what I need to do, obstacle or task, that activates the goal-orientated aspect of executive function. It's a specific network called the task positive network. And psychologically, it creates what's called mental contrasting. And the reason that term comes up is because you've got the contrast between the idea of what you want, in this case, the fantasy or the idea, the imagination. You've got that contrasted with where you are right now and the task you've got to do to get there. And when you do that, the networks that activate in your brain include going down and releasing glucose from your liver and activating and increasing your heart rate to prepare your body for action. So rumination and fantasy don't do that, but mental contrasting does. And mental contrasting is an example, a very practical example that doesn't involve you sitting there with your eyes closed going, It's a practical example of being in the present moment. What is in front of me right now? And that is a practical example of practicing present moment awareness. Yeah. The other thing about that is, well, what are your thoughts about that? And so far with this, any comments or insights that this prompts in you?
I've been talking to a lot of people, and happened to me. For years, we made a living marketing, doing for small businesses. We could do marketing, Google AdWords or Facebook ads or SEO or copywriting. And all that has changed in the last year with AI and Google's changes and Facebook's changes. There's so many people that can't find work. And like the top marketers aren't doing marketing anymore. So I have a lot of people coming to me like, what am I going to do? So they're trying to fantasize, what's my next step? But they ruminate back into, oh, I should have done this. I would have been better off. So I can see them spiraling back and forth between fantasy and rumination.
Yeah, 100%. So present moment awareness, there's an interesting thing about this. If we get into very basic physics and some neuroscience for a second, time, because we talked about a moment here. What is it even is a moment? Let's put some practical parameters around this. Time is theoretically infinitely divisible. I can get a second and divide it by 2. That's half a second. I can divide that by 2. That's a quarter of a second. I can divide that by 2, and on and on and on and on and on. And theoretically infinite. In physics, and I'd be upfront here, I'm no physicist, and so I'm about to share with you the extent of my knowledge when it comes to physics on this topic. But there are equations that use time, and these equations work up until a point. So the smaller the time that you put into these equations, it keeps working and keeps working until a point where you've divided the times to the smallest amount that now the equation doesn't work and doesn't make sense. And they call that Planck's number. And it's the number in physics where they're saying, well, beyond that division of time, nothing works in reality. So they could say, so maybe that is the most divisible, the smallest amount of time, which they might call a moment. Okay. Now, from our perspective, from a neuroscience perspective, from the studies they've done, it takes us between 300 to 500 milliseconds to experience a moment for that unit of awareness. And so from a physics point of view, it's Planck's number, which is, I don't know, 0 to minus 64 or something. For us, it's 300 to 500 milliseconds. All right, okay? Because that's how long it takes. So I just want to share with you on a later on, actually. Oops, I missed up. Basically, what it's saying is that anything outside of that 300 to 500 milliseconds doesn't exist. So the past doesn't exist. The future absolutely doesn't exist. They are abstractions. They are constructions of our mind. We might be good at predicting the future, but we're also woefully bad at predicting the future as well.
Right.
But all we can count on is right now, 300 to 500 milliseconds, which we can't really count, but it's past.
Yeah.
That's our present moment. So the whole thing about being in the present moment, we already are. That's the only place we can be, is in this present moment. That's the only thing we have. We don't have the past. We don't have the future. We've only got the present moment. And in that case, we are stewards because we are the owners of that moment.
Right.
And jumping back over here to responsibility, we are 100% responsible for that moment.
Yeah.
No one else is. Only we are. So if people struggle with trying to understand what does it mean to really be 100% responsible, it's saying you've only got a moment and you're in it and it's gone. What are you doing with the moment? Because no one else can do anything with that moment, only you. Things might be happening to you in that moment, but you can't control that. What can you control? What you do in the moment, what
Mhm.
you think in that moment, what you act with in that moment. And so it's about being a steward of the moment. And also, as we begin to age, I'm turning 55 this year. And we're actually moving home. So we've been in our current home for 15 years, and we're about to move to another home and we may be there for another 15 years. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, that means I'd be 70. So we then start becoming more acutely aware of our moments because they're fewer than they were 15 years ago, right? So if not now, when? To take this all on board, because if you are not doing this, your rumination and fantasy tends to lead to more pain and struggle. And haven't we all had enough pain and struggle?
Yes.
You can keep, I'm not saying that we are wrong for having had the pain and struggle. I'm not saying that any of these are the right way to do it. And this is going to give you a clue. I'm just saying it's another way to do it.
Mhm.
You don't have to change. You're not wrong for keeping on doing it the exact way you've been doing it forever. You're not right for changing. It's just that you're responsible and you get to choose. We don't have to put it through a lens of whether it's right or wrong.
Hmm.
So if we talk about that, that leads me into talking about the thinking framework of the right-wrong dichotomy. What could we do instead of that? Well, another one, I learned this from Dr. Michael Hewitt Gleason. He's a cognitive psychologist, a cognitive scientist, and he's the first person to have done a Ph.D. in lateral thinking back
Hmm.
in the 70s and 80s. And he said another framework is we've got the current situation that we are in, and we are always and only ever in that current situation. He didn't phrase it this way, but do you realize that by saying that, that's the present moment awareness?
Yeah.
We're only in the present moment. That is our current situation.
Hmm.
But in that current situation, we can always imagine a better version of our situation, something that's better about it. And you talked about that. You've got people fantasizing about, okay, I can't do this anymore. But what could I do? This is a natural instinct of our brains to think about what could be better.
Right.
If you are using your moment, which we talked about as being 300 to 500 milliseconds, if you are using your moment to judge what's right or wrong, are you thinking about what the better version is and what the current obstacles are to get there? You can't use your moment to do both.
Right.
And so what he's suggesting is, by all means, go ahead and spend your life in right-wrong dichotomy. Or for a moment, just stop and pause and go, what's the current version of my situation? It's this. What is the better version of my situation? It's that. How do I get there?
Yeah.
That is very empowering because that is a different thinking framework. It's different because, one, it stimulates mental contrasting, like we talked about before. It fills your mind with the possibility of the future and how to get there. It triggers your task positive network, your goal-oriented network, pulls you out of default mode network, which is rumination and fantasy. And also, because you're not filling your mind with right and wrong, you then aren't judging yourself and you're not judging others, which means you're less likely to get emotionally hijacked by negative emotions.
Hmm.
This is profound just in itself.
Yeah.
And all you have to do to apply this is the next time you're feeling anxious, the next time you feel worry, the next time you experience any pain and struggle, is to just have enough awareness to stop and say, what's the current version of my situation? What's the better version of my situation? And allow your brain to begin to think about, how do I get there? Because when you do that, I call that expansive thinking as opposed to linear thinking, right? And that expansive thinking causes you to grow.
Right.
None of these others really do. They all lead back to pain and struggle. Expansive thinking causes you to grow. If anyone listening were to just implement this one different thinking framework, you would notice quite significant changes in your lives, in your relationships, in your work, etc.
That's powerful. Because I grew up in a right and wrong situation. My grandfather and my mother were always like blaming. If something didn't go their way, they blamed the other person. So I
Yeah,
grew up with that from, constantly. So now
it's
I
a
can
it's a
catch
learned
that.
behavior. We all did. Yeah, we very
Yeah.
much all did.
Yeah.
And whether how strong that was with our parents, we would have seen it at school. We would have seen it play out, in talkback radio. arguing, and now social media, arguing, and now the 24/7 news cycle, arguing.
Yeah.
At work, people needing to one up one another, all that sort of stuff. I have drawn a very thin dotted line here because I want to be as transparent as I can. You can still grow with linear thinking. You can still generate resilience. A lot of people have developed successful lives and careers using this thinking approach. I'm just saying that it's a longer and slower path to growth than expansive thinking is.
Right.
And this is an option. It's just another option to think a different way. The other one that I usually then, because this is so simple and straightforward, this is where I usually start with people, because it's not about them as a person or anything like that. They can go, okay, I can stop and I can think about this. And it's interesting when you engage people in that conversation, or they could have spent the hour complaining about what's gone on, but instead they spend the hour talking about how they can get to the better version of the situation.
Right.
Right. The next one I then go to, because I need to tackle it with folks, is the responsibility thing. Because when you are able to understand that you are 100% responsible for your moment, and hopefully some of the ways I've framed that today have helped people understand that, especially present moment awareness. It's your moment, no one else's. When you begin to accept this 100% responsibility thing, and you're a yes on that, that's called an internal locus of control. That's where you feel like, yes, there's things I can't control, but I can control me. And this is what I can do in this moment, no matter what that moment is. That's an internal locus of control, and that's personal empowerment. And to make no bones about it, we've all read the most inspiring stories of people who've had all of their power taken away. And yet all they've had access to is their mind, and they have retained that resilience. Nelson Mandela would be an example of that. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not talking about just dealing with business. I'm talking about devastating life circumstances, and the fact that you can choose what to do in that moment and be 100% responsible. And if you do that, of course, it leads to growth. Now, the other really amazing thing that can come out of this is that if you realize that you are 100%. So Ted, are you 100% responsible for yourself?
Not always. But now I'm aware of it.
Yeah, now you're aware of it. But if you are ultimately, even if you don't think you are, if you're ultimately 100% responsible for yourself, 100% means whole. Does that mean anyone else can be responsible for you?
No.
No. So that also means that you can't be responsible for anyone else. And so that what you realize is that when you realize you are 100% responsible for yourself, it also means you realize that everyone else is 100% responsible for themselves. So I'll give you an example of why this has shown up a lot for me in coaching. I've had quite a lot of people in the helping professions, doctors, that kind of thing, who have consulted me, and a lot of them experience burnout. And one of the reasons they experience burnout is they're taking on the responsibility of others. They feel responsible for others. It's a natural thing. That's why they were drawn to the healing professions in the first place, this wanting to help others, and they feel responsible for them. What they're trying to do, though, is impossible because they're not responsible for the others. They are only 100% responsible for themselves. So they are 100% responsible to do the doctoring, but they are not 100% responsible or even 1% responsible for the patient. Yeah. So even when we say that patient is your responsibility, I need to decode that and really say, you have said that you are going to be responsible for yourself in the doctoring of this person. But this person here, whether they get better or not, what they do in their mind is 100% on them. Mm-hmm. And so when doctors can actually begin to separate the two and realize that they are not responsible for the patient is, but they are responsible for being the best doctor they can be. And that the minute they try and be responsible for the patient is the minute they try and do something impossible, and is why they begin to burn out, which makes them less able to be a good doctor. Right. So in order for them to be the best doctor, they are compelled to realize they are not responsible for the patient, because that helps them be a better doctor, which is what they are responsible for being. Also, it removes the burnout issue because they're not walking around with the constant weight of this impossible thing.
Yeah.
that's on them. Okay. And so it could be the same with clients. You are responsible as a marketer to do the best possible thing you can do in your skill set and your knowledge to provide that service. But you are not responsible for the business that's not yours.
Right.
Okay. If it's not your business, you are not responsible for it. All you are responsible for is being the best possible marketer or whatever it is, growth expert that you can be. That's it. Whereas a lot of agency owners, if things aren't going well, feel like it's their marketing. They feel responsible that somehow they've got to rescue the business, where the business could be in trouble because of any other number of factors. The offer isn't a great offer. The offer was a great offer, but now it's not so great. The offer was a great offer when there was 5 offers in the market. Now there's 50.
Yeah.
Right? That's not the marketer's problem. That's the business owner's responsibility. And
Yeah.
so again, this is a really essential thing. And people have so much struggle when they try and take on the responsibility of something that is actually fundamentally not their responsibility. And so when they, when they don't recognize this, they are attempting the impossible that leads to more pain and struggle. If they do recognize that others are responsible for themselves, yes, that then leads them to grow. Right? How does that one hit home for you?
There's so many times where I've worked with clients and they struggled. So I would give them extra time and extra effort. So I'd end up getting burnout because I'm doing all their work, trying to get them to get, but they weren't doing their job.
Yeah.
Or they stopped
Yeah.
showing up for calls or things like that. But I just always wanted to help everybody be successful. So I burn out a lot of times.
And in so doing, you train them that they don't need to take responsibility for their business.
Right. And then my
Yeah.
business suffers, like you said.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. The third one, we're getting through this, we're getting close to the end. The third one here is present moment awareness. If people can practice that present moment awareness, as we talked about, and I gave the example of mental contrasting just being one of them, it leads them to have this sense of fundamental okayness. And yes, that is an academic term because there's been a couple of large studies on thousands of people who are who are able to understand and have that present moment awareness, and they all have a sense or develop a sense of everything's fundamentally okay, even when there's chaos. They go, yes, there's chaos, but everything feels fundamentally okay. This is crucial because that means right there that the executive function is not being hijacked by emotions. That is that emotional regulation that takes place. And if ever you need to be on point with your executive function, it is in times of chaos. If
Right.
you need your brain to function at its best, it's when there's a big problem, right? And so for anyone who is in a problem right now, a problem situation, that's often when we go to pieces. But that's actually where we need to actually step up even more into our executive function. And I'm giving you examples here of actually I can cancel that. I'll push that meeting back.
Is this where like
Um,
breath work would help you get back to the present moment or meditation?
that can be it for sure, and I teach people that. For me, the pure reason and logic around the present moment was enough for me to realize this.
Okay.
Because realizing that you've got 300 to 500 milliseconds, that's the only moment, and you're only ever in that moment. And in that moment, you're fundamentally okay.
Yeah.
You are. And then the fear and the worry is all about the future moments that we are imagining,
Hmm.
right? That's a word my daughter made up, and it's stuck. Imaginating, right? It's the fantasy that we fantasizing in the future that it's going to be a bad future, and when we do that, we get emotionally hijacked, and we now can't perform in the moment.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we can absolutely do breath work. If you're stressed, everyone knows that hopefully that if you take slow, deep breaths over 4 to 6 seconds into the abdomen, that begins to calm down the mind. You're using a behavioral effect, a bodily, physical thing to calm the mind down.
Right.
But for me, it's absolutely pure reason and logic that does this. It
Mhm.
cuts through the emotional hijacking. You go, I'm only in this moment, and right now I'm fundamentally okay. Current version of the situation is this. Better version is that. How do I get there? What do I do in my moment? Because only I'm responsible for my moment.
Yeah.
and I accept what is, because to accept to say what is isn't is like saying there's no mountain there when there is.
Right.
No amount of wishing the mountain isn't there is going to make the mountain go away.
Yeah.
Fundamental okayness leads to growth. And the last one here we just mentioned is accepting what is and being able to accept what is. If you can accept what is, it's not, again, it's not about condoning or endorsing it. Okay. But there are things in life that have happened that you might not want to have happened, but they have happened.
Right.
And saying they haven't happened and pretending they haven't happened leads to pain and struggle.
Right.
If you accept what is, you grow. Because if I accept what is, I can then think, this is the current situation. What's the better situation and how do I get there? And can I do that without having to make people wrong or right, and instead just move into the better version of the situation and be responsible for myself?
Yeah.
Do you see how these all then begin to link in?
Yeah.
And then you've got green across the board, which leads to growth. You take away that green and everything points back to red, pain and struggle.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great.
Um, yeah, that's it. So, back over to you. That's the presentation. So yeah,
It's real
back to
great.
you.
It's just it's so complex, but it's so simple. When you think 300 milliseconds, that's
Yeah,
all I got to worry about.
that that's right. That's right.
What can happen to me in 300 milliseconds?
That's right.
But accepting what is huge too. All of them are huge, and be responsible for yourself, especially with the environment we have on social media now. Everybody's just attacking each other and hating each other, and but you can just be responsible for yourself and step away. Yeah,
That's right. That's right.
yeah. So much learning here. But that whole thing with my wife and being late, it's like for years we all tried to say, "Mom," and she just won't change. So okay, that's the way it is. And if it's really important, I drive separately and get there early.
That's 100% right. Or, do I play other tricks, like say we have to be there at 6:30, but you don't actually have to be there till 7 or whatever it is.
Our friends
You
did
know,
that for years and she caught on.
right. Yeah. Uh, that's the case. And so look, with all of this, I would say learning about this for the people I take through this, for a lot of them, all four of these, they recognize in themselves and go, my goodness, I can see why. I've had 20, 30 years of struggle.
Yeah.
And I've been successful, but I've had to push and strive and exhaust myself the whole time against the pain and struggle. Imagine if I didn't have that weighing me down. Imagine if I could have grown the whole time and experienced this kind of fundamental okayness through the whole thing. Imagine how many arguments I wouldn't have had.
Yeah.
Imagine how many relationships wouldn't have blown up. Imagine how many promotions I might have got, deals I might have closed, stress I wouldn't have had, whether a deal closed or not,
Yeah.
all that type of thing.
Those sleepless nights when you're worrying about something.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So learning about them is one thing and can be actually quite a big prompt. Just learning about them will change people's lives if they take this on board. I have a series of cognitive protocols that I take people through that really help to lock in all four of these and others actually that crop up. And that's what the work I do. That's what Neurocognitive is all about. So I apply all that brain stuff at the beginning we talked about, where you came into my world, was actually applying that to neuromarketing and how to influence people.
Right.
But I apply all of this through to a lot of kind of executives, business leaders, and coaches, and that kind of thing, who are and career professionals who are just looking to really get out of pain and struggle and have the kind of growth they have. And so we hadn't talked about this a lot. At the moment, I'm actually I'm finishing up a book on this that I'm more than happy to share with your community. That'll be something. And so what I do, that should be finished in the next week. So I'm more than happy for you to provide a link for or send that out to people and include that for them. That'd be great for them.
That's awesome.
Um, and then the I guess just the other thing is if anyone is interested in getting in contact with me at all, they're the places where you can. I know that you're very active on LinkedIn. I'm not as active on LinkedIn because there's only so many things you can do, but that's my LinkedIn profile. And the main website's neurocognix.com. And that Neurocognix name, I love it. Because it's talking about the neural networks in the brain and how they affect our cognition and how our cognition in turn affects our neurology.
Yeah.
And the X stands for it's that X factor of potential. Um, and we have no idea just what our potential really is. It's still
Right.
a big query, but it's exciting. And so
Yeah.
that's where the name kind of comes from.
Then we've really kind of just scratched the surface of what you can do with this.
Yes. Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great. This has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolute pleasure.
Everybody, I highly recommend getting in touch because, and you were talking about that new thing. You had this device you were working on some project.
Yeah, it's very exciting. There's a whole field new field of research. It's not new at all, actually, but it's growing. It's got a new wave of research, and it's bioelectricity. And the term is the human electrome. So we've had the genome project, which was like 1990 to 2000 or so. And now we've got the human electrome project, which is where they're mapping all the electrical properties of the cells we have, because it's not just our nerves and muscles that have electrical current or electrical potential. It's all of our cells. And those potentials, those electrical currents, are abnormal when tissues are abnormal. And so there's a whole push now to map what that is. But when it comes to the brain, yes, I use neuromodulation techniques to help people. And we're launching, there's a new company that's launched in Europe, and I'm bringing it out here to Australia. And we're using it in clinical populations as well with people who've got chronic pain, mood disorders, um, Parkinson's disease, post-stroke, accidents, learning disorders, brain fog, that slight mental decline. There's a
Right.
whole lot of application for putting bioelectric currents or other types of stimulation through the brain, where you can actually map the brain and see the brain in real time and see where you are targeting in order to create change. And it's the reason it's phenomenal is because, again, depending on how much you know about it, there's a whole field of neuromodulation looking at surgically implanting devices, so deep brain stimulators or spinal cord stimulators, where they place the devices in the brain to provide that constant stimulus. But of course, along with that comes all the risks of brain surgery and the fact that sometimes the devices move or sometimes they wear out and they have to be replaced, which
Yeah.
means more surgery. And if you can use a non-invasive brain stimulator to achieve similar results, then that's absolutely worth a try before necessarily going in and having surgery. It all depends, of course, on
Yeah.
the the case and etc. So no, that's very exciting. But while it can be used in those clinical populations, which I'm very excited about because some of the cases I've seen just bring tears to my eyes with how life changing they are.
Yeah.
It can be used, and I'm using it to enhance my own cognition.
Hmm.
And we can do another entire topic on call on that at some point if you want to, about how neuromodulation can help improve executive function, attentional focus, decision making, creativity, reducing brain fog, all of those kinds of things. These devices, which are relatively inexpensive compared to what they used to be, and then can be used at home to actually really improve people's cognitive function and etc. So it's a very exciting field to be part of.
Yeah. Great. We'll definitely touch bases.
Yeah.
My friend Ray Edwards had that surgery. He has Parkinson's and he had the brain implant things implanted into his brain, and it's really helped him because he could barely move and walk anymore. And he's living a great life again. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw a case come through the other day of a guy who he's got an ataxia where he can't control his body movements. His head moves all the time. And so because of that, he has to have a general anesthesia just to have an MRI, because, in an MRI, you need to remain so still. It
Right.
also meant that he hadn't been able to have dental work done for a number of years because the dentist literally can't get
Oh
into
my
his
God.
mouth. Half an hour after non-invasive brain stimulus, the guy was sitting there just completely still with this huge smile on his face. Because can you imagine for 4 years not being able to stop this constant movement? Um, we're living in very exciting times. It's a great time to be alive.
Yeah. And AI is going to make it even better, right?
The bigger the back, the bigger the front. We have to
Yeah.
we have to you know
Well,
be
thank you so
responsible.
much for your time. This has been fabulous. I love this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, good. That's a pleasure.
I'll
I
see
think
you
it's
on
really important
LinkedIn
work you're
too.
doing. What's that?
I'll see you on LinkedIn too.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right.
Cool. Thank you so much.